Hello and welcome to a special edition of political talk show Global Discussion. I'm Anastasia Lavrina.
The aim of this program is to shed the light on the work of the United Nations Global Compact, very unique and very important operation within the United Nations, its main principles and fundamental responsibilities. We will try to answer the question how Azerbaijan can benefit from the cooperation with this structure to get more ideas and skills to turn the vision of the 2030 agenda into reality. Launched in 1999 as a special initiative of the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, the United Nations Global Compact provides a framework for developing a more sustainable and responsible business. It calls to business worldwide to help build the social and environmental framework to support and ensure the continuation of open and free markets, while ensuring that people everywhere have a chance to share the benefits of the new global economy. Today, the United Nations Global Compact is the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world, with more than 10,000 companies and 3,000 non-business signatories based in over 160 countries and more than 60 local networks. The role of business in delivering the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was the focus of the UN-organized conference in Baku, Azerbaijan, that brought together some 80 participants from the government agencies, businesses, international organizations, civil society and the media. Co-organized by the UN Resident Coordinators Office, UNICEF, UN Global Compact, UN Women and UNDP, the conference underlined the importance of integrating the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact on human rights, labor, environment and anti-corruption into business policies and practices. The 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact are derived from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Labour Organization's Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, and the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Azerbaijan, as a country which pays special attention to successful implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, dedicates special attention to cooperation with the United Nations institutions. 11 entities from Azerbaijan, including several NGOs, business associations and companies, are the participants of the United Nations Global Compact. More on this topic we will talk with Mr. Angus Rennienin, Senior Manager, UN Relations and Partnership, United Nations Global Compact.
Mr. Rennie, thank you very much for your kind agreement to join our program today.
Delighted to be here, Anastasia.
And welcome to Azerbaijan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So today we're going to talk about a United Nations Global Compact, but coming to this particular question, I would like briefly to ask you to tell us a bit more about this structure. As you know, these Sustainable Development Goals, they were adopted 4 years ago almost, and there are still processes ongoing, and many countries are trying to pay particular attention to successful achievement of this Agenda 2030. But cooperation between the governments, it's definitely not enough. There should be partnership between civil society, private sector, and between the governments. Definitely, United Nations Global Compact is doing excellent job. That's why, just tell us a bit more. How do you see the progress achieved by this structure, this organization, particularly in last years?
Thanks so much. I think you put it so well. The 2030 Agenda itself was an amazing accomplishment when all of the world's governments aligned and agreed to set 17 ambitious goals for people, for the planet, for peace, for prosperity. And they also agreed, Goal 17 being partnerships, that government alone will not be able to address the global challenges that the 2030 Agenda
There should be cooperation, integration.
Exactly. And so that's really the role of the Global Compact, is to bring the private sector into the conversation, to translate the Sustainable Development Goals into a business framework that makes sense for companies, that they understand and that they can implement in their core business, while also respecting the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact Initiative, which are fundamental. They are aligned with UN values and norms, and they are a guiding light for companies around how to do business responsibly in a way that can help them also achieve success as companies.
You know, that's very interesting. We are talking about business, which is quite far away from the politics, but still, United Nations Global Compact decided to concentrate on the business industries and make a platform between business industry and United Nations for better implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. Why decided exactly business? how it can
I'm happy to tell
contribute.
that story. Yeah, let me step back because we are approaching our 20th anniversary. And the story really begins with the Secretary General Kofi Annan in 1999 at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He issued a challenge in famous remarks that he delivered, calling on the business community and the United Nations and governments to come together in a global compact, an agreement that recognized the importance of responsible business. And he asked companies to help to work with the UN to put a human face on global markets, recognizing that there was mistrust, a lot of hostility among many different populations in the world with globalization, around the lack of responsibility of companies, the failure to respect human rights, the failure to protect the environment, the failure to do business in a way that respects the rule of law. The challenge that Kofi Annan issued turned into the 10 principles of the Global Compact and became a movement that is now 10,000 strong with 10,000 companies around the world who have committed to this idea of responsible business and working with the UN to really transform the private sector so that we can leave the world in a better shape for future generations.
Do you think it really make a progress of working on different companies? Because as far as I know, there is a special report that the companies have to work on and prepare and then upload it in order to prove their commitment to follow all the 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact. But still, do you think that the companies feel more responsibility, especially when it comes to environmental protection, if they have this membership in the United Nations Global Compact?
I think that's a critical element of what it means to be part of the UN Global Compact, the accountability and the transparency that we expect of companies. There is a requirement for companies to provide an annual report, which we call the Communication on Progress. And it's a very flexible format, but it's non-negotiable that if you are participating in the Global Compact as a company, every year, you must report, you must tell us what you are doing to live out your commitment to the initiative. And these reports are all available on our website from the last 15 years since the time we introduced this requirement. And it's a critical accountability mechanism. And it's a great way for a company to make sure that they are doing what they say. It enables stakeholders, whether it's civil society or investors or governments or the UN itself, to analyze a company and to frankly challenge it, to make sure that it really is living up to the commitment that is a serious commitment to do business responsibly and support the SDGs. And interestingly, those COPs, the Communication on Progress, are a tool that external stakeholders really value as a way to assess whether a company is truly committed to sustainability and responsible business practices. And that really sets us apart, I think, from a lot of other initiatives, is that accountability and transparency. And interestingly, here in Azerbaijan, talking to companies about, what is this requirement to report? And they want to make sure they understand it because it's a serious commitment. It's an important element of what it means to be a company involved with the UN Global Compact.
If there is any specific direction in the companies you're mostly working in, because talking about the business and civil society, still there are many directions. So if there is a specific direction of businesses or enterprises who are mostly involved in the implementation?
What's amazing about the initiative is its diversity. So we have companies from 160 plus countries around the world who are participating.
And you're making like a platform, cooperation between them and also with the United Nations, right?
Yes, essentially we're a public-private platform for learning, engagement, dialogue, and continuous improvement in corporate practices. And we have companies from all sectors and sizes. Over half of our participant base are actually small and medium enterprises. And we have nearly 70 local networks, which are country-based chapters. They're business-led organizations that have a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations Global Compact, and they take forward the initiative with local business stakeholders to help make it a reality in local business communities, to help take this global agenda and translate it into local business opportunities.
You also slightly spoke about Azerbaijan. So now you're here in this beautiful country, and most probably you have a specific goal. So could you tell us a bit more about your visit? Why you decided to visit this country? Because Azerbaijan is also contributing much to implementation of Sustainable Development Goals since 2015. Before it was Millennium Development Goals, and now we observe the progress in our country. But you are, as a foreigner, as a guest in our country, how do you evaluate the progress achieved? And also slightly about your main goal of your visit to Azerbaijan.
Well, it's been an incredible mission. It's been a privilege to be invited to come and engage with companies from Azerbaijan. I'm collaborating with the United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office, as well as other UN partners such as UNICEF and UN Women, UNDP, who have all recognized the importance of mobilizing the local business community to help them understand better the Sustainable Development Goals and to encourage them to join the Global Compact, to make that commitment to learn and engage and develop good sustainability practices. And so it's been an exciting few days of meeting with companies, explaining the role of the Global Compact, explaining the value of participating.
The benefits.
Exactly. What are the benefits? Because it's an incredible value add for a company, we believe, to be part of this initiative, this global initiative, to learn from peers, from competitors, to have support from UN technical experts. We're an amazing, essentially multi-stakeholder partnership initiative, and companies stand to benefit a lot from the resources we provide, from the convening we offer, from global level meetings in New York to regional meetings to the kind of local meetings that we've seen in Baku the last few days. It's the pathway for a company that is serious about sustainability to learn, engage, improve, and also promote their leadership.
Did you observe any success in Azerbaijani companies? So you already see the potential for the future cooperation, or how it's?
There are a few companies from Azerbaijan who are actively engaging in the initiative, including one that is a member of our lead group of companies who are most active in the UN Global Compact. And I think that's really commendable. What we hope to see is more companies joining here in the country, and eventually, if we gain sufficient numbers, to launch a Global Compact Network Azerbaijan. And so I really want to encourage local businesses to consider joining the Global Compact to help build the movement here in the country so that we can advance sustainability and the priorities of Azerbaijan by working with the business sector.
By the way, we were very, very glad and happy to see that Sokar Agache has been announced as Global Compact lead. So a big privilege for Azerbaijan, and I think that it will foster the cooperation. So do you think that if there are more better cooperation between the United Nations Global Compact and Azerbaijani companies, then it can bring more positive outcomes for Sustainable Development Goals implementation by our country?
Absolutely, and cooperation and partnership is key. From our perspective at the UN Global Compact, a winning formula for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals at the national and local level is absolutely tackling the problems and the challenges and the priorities in partnership with government at the table. Of course, it's the primary responsibility of government to drive that progress, to identify the priorities, to measure and report on the implementation. But the task can't be achieved unless business is brought into the conversation, along with civil society, along with the UN actors on the ground and others, to figure out what kind of whole of society approach can we take to achieving the goals. And so in other countries, and this is a model for Azerbaijan to consider, for instance, part of the SDG agreement, the 2030 Agenda Agreement, involves governments volunteering once a year in New York to provide a national report on the status of the implementation of the goals, on the progress that they have made. And in some countries, the development of that report will involve active consultation and input from the private sector. And in many instances, it's the Global Compact and its local networks that are leading that business input into that process. So we have governments that come to New York that present their reports that speak about the challenges and the progress that they've made. And when they reflect on the contributions of business, they're really referring to the leadership and the contributions of the Global Compact, the network that they have in their country, and the individual companies that are supporting it.
Yes, for my opinion, let's say that is something very good for the companies also to find new partners, because this trip and these events in New York, it's a good platform. Again, I can repeat these words. That's a good platform for the companies to integrate for better result in achieving for sustainable development goals. But for our viewers, maybe there are some companies who are currently watching our program and they may decide to join the United Nations Global Compact. Could you tell us about the process on how it works, how the companies who has never had any cooperation with United Nations Global Compact can follow this procedure and become a member?
Well, we'd love to hear from them. We are ready, we are by the phone, we're ready to take their calls, we're ready to answer their emails.
So there is a specific consultation you are providing also?
Yes, exactly. We're ready to support companies. We know that they need to have the guidance and the orientation to understand what the commitment is. And that's important because we want them to take that seriously. It is a serious commitment to being a responsible business, to learning and improving, and reporting, being accountable for that commitment. So what that involves more specifically, the first step is for the chief executive of a company to express his or her commitment to the Secretary General of the UN to support the Global Compact. So that takes the form of a simple letter. So the CEO writes to the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and says, we, Company X from Azerbaijan, support the UN Global Compact, commit to supporting the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact in our business operations, and supporting the United Nations in its efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda. And as part of that, we commit to the annual communication on progress. So that's the first step, that letter of commitment from the leadership of the company. And then there's a short application process and a review from the New York office, followed by a company onboarding, receiving orientation, and having a platform, as you described it, of different engagement and learning opportunities that can help guide that company in their journey to be sustainable and responsible.
And for this new company who may decide to join, what kind of benefits immediately the company can get?
Well, there are a few. The first is to build trust and transparency. So to build trust in a company's brand, by making that public commitment and affiliating with the United Nations and saying publicly, we are committed to being a better business, to being responsible, and we're willing to be held accountable for that. Companies who are in the Global Compact tell us that that's tremendously powerful in terms of their brand, the strength of their brand, for a variety of stakeholders. So first, of course, naturally, you could consider customers, consumers. Increasingly, there's an expectation for, in particular, consumer-facing brands, so household brands, that they do business in a responsible and sustainable way. And when you look at, for instance, millennial consumers, that's their expectation of business as usual. It's non-negotiable for younger consumers that companies should be respecting human rights, treating their workers fairly, not polluting, thinking about their carbon emissions and contributing to prevent the climate crisis.
To think about.
Absolutely. So this is just almost goes without saying for the younger generation. So the affiliation with the UN Global Compact can be a great signal that a company takes that seriously and is committed. But also for investors, and this is a huge emerging development that businesses are taking note of and are telling us is increasingly important to them. The responsible investment movement, the interest of markets in sustainability is growing astronomically. Investors recognize that we're living in a time of great fragility as a planet, and that you can't do business on a dead planet. And there's no plan B because there's no planet B. And so that boils down to some pretty fundamental investment principles. If you're thinking about protecting your assets, risks of investments, creating long-term value, sustainability becomes non-negotiable. And so for companies, signaling through their involvement in the UN Global Compact and their communication of their progress in implementing the 10 principles and the SDGs, that they take that agenda seriously, can incentivize the kind of investors that they need to ensure that they have the support from their shareholders, for instance, to make those changes to transform their business for that long term. So moving from thinking about the next quarter to the next quarter century and beyond, and that's the kind of strategy that companies who are in the Global Compact are adopting, recognizing that investors and consumers increasingly expect that of them.
And if I'm not mistaken, one more thing which is really United Nations Global Compact cares about, it's about equality and diversity, which is really important for successful implementation of sustainable development goals. And if I'm not mistaken, that was one of the panel here during the conference in Baku, where the gender issues were also raised. And do you think that this United Nations Global Compact and its integration which it provides for the companies can really help in achievement of this particular goal as well? Because for me, gender equality is not only for one goal. There is something like twin track approach between the goals, which is really interconnected. And if we talk about environmental sustainability and about the business development and etc., then for sure there is something to talk about gender equality as well.
Absolutely. I think that you nailed it. It's a real concern for us. At this stage, based on the progress we've made in the last few years, where we've had any progress at all on gender equality, it's going to take us, we estimate, over 200 years to achieve the gender equality goal of the 2030 Agenda.
We are on the right way right now, I guess.
200 years. It's unacceptable. And as you said, this is an integrated agenda. It was deliberately designed that way. And gender, I mean, you could make this case for all of the goals in some way, but in particular gender, if we can access or make the progress that we need, if we can get past those roadblocks and get beyond this challenge of it taking 200 years for equality at the table among women and men, we are going to unlock progress and accelerate progress, whether it's climate change, whether it's education. Absolutely. When you have women and men at the table making decisions together, the progress is accelerated. So it's a huge opportunity, it's a huge potential tipping point, and it's something that we're very focused on as an initiative.
Yes, and I was really, really glad to see the progress achieved by United Nations Global Compact, even when I saw the news about that on November 11, there was a website created even in Chinese languages, so it's going to now promote information in Chinese. And I'm really interested to know why exactly Chinese. It's because of China is growing very quickly at the moment in economic way, or it's because there is some ideas to foster cooperation with China. And if Chinese language was already established, if there are any ideas to have more languages, let's say Russian or any other language, official language of the United Nations?
Well, we are a truly global initiative, and we hope to be active and present on the ground in every country eventually. And China certainly is a very important market for sustainability, and there's a lot of interest among Chinese companies. And so the launch of the Chinese website in some ways was responding to the interest and demand that we see. We have a very active Global Compact network in China, for instance. And so that was, I think, an important development for us to better support companies in China to continue to embrace sustainability and find ways to connect to the global 2030 agenda. And that's something that I think we're always hopeful to do and to support. For instance, with our colleagues in the UN office here, translating some of our materials so they're available to stakeholders here in Azerbaijan. That's definitely something that we welcome whenever,
it will attract more companies
possible.
to think about possibility to join this.
Absolutely. We have a campaign and a slogan that we call Making Global Goals. The SDGs are often called the global goals. Local business. So how do we translate that global agenda, both literally into other languages and also from this set of goals into business imperatives?
And such a question, probably it's a bit negative, but definitely in all structures there is something to work more on about. If there is any specific fails you have in United Nations Global Compact, or still trying to improve any of this structure, any direction, and etc., if there is any some kind of things.
So we regularly survey CEOs from around the world to take the pulse on their views on sustainable business and key trends and developments. And this year's CEO study, as well as a progress report that we issue annually, drawing on data from all of the companies in the Global Compact, was in some ways a wake-up call to us, because there was a widespread recognition from the executives who were surveyed that we're not doing enough to achieve the goals. And CEOs
there is never enough
recognize the importance of the SDGs, which is the first step, is really getting business to understand that this is really relevant for business. But there was an admission that we need to do more, that we're basically not on track to achieve the 2030 agenda unless we get more ambitious. And so it was great to hear CEOs essentially issue a call to action to the global private sector saying, listen, we have to do more. And we can't point fingers at government and other stakeholders. It's our responsibility to show greater leadership and more ambition. We have the solutions at hand. We just need to show the leadership to make this happen.
It's really a huge success which United Nations Global Compact has at the moment, because as you mentioned previously, more than 160 countries and almost 10,000 organizations already became a member. So if there is a limit for a number of organizations United Nations Global Compact has, or still it has a huge ambitions, really huge job has to be done more in order to achieve the final results? Any specific, maybe more plans which the organization has?
Well, that's a great question. I think if you look at the global private sector, 10,000 is an important number, but it's a small fraction of the global economy. And we do really want to mainstream these concepts so that we essentially put ourselves out of business at some later date, so that sustainability is just so common and mainstream and almost taken for granted that our mission becomes obsolete. So yes, in the long term, that's our hope. But we build the global movement case by case, company by company, country by country, SDG by SDG, principle by principle, and that's an ongoing effort. And it's truly rewarding and inspiring to see the interest and the growing interest from the private sector, in particular from young entrepreneurs who are just demonstrating that this is sort of just standard business.
That is specific direction concept. For youth, or it's like also overall?
So young entrepreneurs in particular are really leading the pack, are inspiring their business peers through innovation, through startup, through just really absorbing the concepts of the SDGs and responsible business as core to their business ideas and their business models and their value propositions. And that's, I think, a pretty critical driver of taking the initiative to the next level with the next generation of leaders.
For me, it's also like for young people, they feel more responsibility probably for successful implementation of sustainable development goals, and especially when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to the environmental protection, youth has to be involved in all of these projects. That's in my understanding.
Absolutely, and Greta Thunberg and other activist young people are, I think, inspiring the business sector who are realizing we have to do this. We just don't have a choice. It makes me think of actually a personal conversation I had with my brother who has a young child, and he's getting involved. He's not in business, but he's getting involved in climate action. And he said, I have to have some way to explain to my daughter what was I doing at this time of climate emergency. And I thought that was so powerful, and I've used that actually even today in the conference. I said to the companies present, how do we explain to our grandchildren the fact that there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish? We have to be more ambitious, and we have to tackle these problems, and business is core to the solutions.
We wish you good luck, and we hope that after this trip to Azerbaijan, you will have more companies from Azerbaijan who may decide to join United Nations Global Compact.
We very much hope so. Thanks for the opportunity for the conversation.
Thank you very much. Just to remind you, watch the special edition of political talk show Global Discussion on CBC channel. Today in our program we had a special guest, Mr. Angus Rennienin, who is Senior Manager, United Nations Relations and Partnership at the United Nations Global Compact. See you in the next edition of Global Discussion.